Welcome to Vibrant Publishers podcast, where we interview experts in various fields to share their insights and knowledge with our listeners. Today, we are joined by Dr. Jamey Long. Jamey is the author of several books on management, leadership skills, and organizational behavior. He's also the author of many fiction books and songs written and being demoed in Nashville. He's the owner of a SBS Management and Consultant Services LLC and co-owner of VOVLL that provides small business management and leadership consulting services. He is a high school teacher and also a member of faculty at George Mason University and Northern Virginia Community College, and was nominated for the NVCC Alumni Federation Faculty of the Year award. He has earned a doctorate of business administration and master's in education and is currently pursuing his second doctoral degree in education from William Howard Taft University and remains busy supporting educational programs, school, businesses, and serving as the youth minister at his church. Jamey, welcome to our podcast and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, could you start by sharing some insights into your background in management and leadership and how it led you to focus on small businesses?
Yeah, so it started with my education. I had an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, and then I got my PhD. And when I was going through that program, I was also working a couple different jobs in the fields of management. I've done some technology, banking, finance, things like that. And what I noticed was everything was focused towards for large businesses. And when I started my small business, I was looking for resources to kind of help me out and kind of see what others are going through. And I realized that there wasn't much out there. They were pretty much taking big business models and picking and choosing what aspects apply. And as you can see, 90% fail within the first 10 years.
Right.
So best strategy. So I decided to take a look and figure out exactly what was going on with those in the different services and goods industries and try to find more tools that were helpful to them.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, small business failure rates have always been a concern. So, from your perspective, what are the primary reasons why small businesses tend to fail?
Yeah, so when you look at that statistic, like I said, about 10, 15 years ago, they were about 90% failure rate in 10 years. Now they've dropped down to 65%. That being
Yeah.
said, that's still more failing than are succeeding. Um, Mainly, it's lack of time, it's lack of resources, finance, and it's also lack of experience. Not that someone needs to have formal education to run a small business. Many of the original ones didn't. The mom and pop stores did great, but with the changing economy, with the changing technologies and things like that, things happen so fast. When you run a small business, you're working all the time, and sometimes you're doing one thing really well and you don't have the time to do everything else that you need to. So I think, the phrase getting lost in the sauce happens a lot. You tend to focus on what you're really good at. You forget the other parts, and those parts are what you really need. But from what I've seen with COVID, the economy, things like that, financing has been a huge concern. Interest rates are killing people personally. And, when you
Right.
got to make a choice between supporting your family or supporting your business, you're going to pay your personal bills. And a lot of small businesses are either personal LLCs or they're sole proprietorships, so that can be an issue. So I think finances and resources, and the fluctuations in the economy have still continued to hamper small businesses more than large businesses.
Okay, got it. And talking about technology, it has evolved significantly in the recent years, and now with AI into Chat GPT and AI has played a significant role as well. How has the digital transformation affected management and leadership strategies required for small businesses success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's affected everything, whether it's in education, which I'm getting my second leadership degree, and we're facing this now. But I think it's affected every business. One is, everything's online now. So it's really easy when you go to a website to get the pop up that says, hey, how can we help you? What can we do? If you're the younger generation, you may like that. If you're the older generation, you absolutely hate it. But when it comes down to is you don't know who you're talking to or what you're talking to or what responses you're going to get. From a business standpoint, I think it's positive because it saves you time instead of having to respond back to every single customer, which if you're a large business, that's a great tool to have. Small businesses, I think, need to go the other way. Most of them are used or supported because of their personal service. So when you start to go to small businesses and you see them using these features, from when I've talked to surveyed other people, it's kind of a turnoff for them because they go to those businesses because they want to talk to somebody. They like the interaction. So you're getting chat GTP and technology, it can be a bad thing. Now, the other thing with, when we saw with COVID, pretty much everybody went with technology. So I think that's a good move because it kind of pushed small businesses out there on an equal level with large businesses to compete globally or transnational, if technology is used the correct way. But again, as a small business owner, just because you have the bells and whistles and the greatest technology out there doesn't mean you know how to use it. So I've seen companies actually suffer from this because there's a training issue and it's taken away from their daily routine just to try to implement the technology. So I think, moderation is good. I think the tools are good, but I think like anything else, small businesses especially need to be very careful what they're choosing and understand why they're choosing it and then implementing it.
Right, correct. And could you highlight some key skills or strategies that you believe are critical for small business owners and leaders today?
Yeah, it goes back to pestle. You got to know your environments. You have your professional environments, economic, social, technological, and those. Um, as a small business owner, you're wearing many hats at one time. You're a leader most of the time, or you're going management functions. What I've seen a lot of small business owners confuse is leadership and management. Those are two different functions. So while it's possible for one person to do both, they need to understand when they're in each one of those roles. Leadership is having the vision, but usually when you're doing the vision, it's more of an umbrella policy and you're passing big ideas down to be managed. Well, then that's where the manager comes in. You have to do those daily tasks. You got to do the day-to-day operations, have policies and procedures in place. A lot of small businesses that I've seen that failed or suffered said they wanted to change anything. It was mainly on the management side. They had the right idea. They were entrepreneurship. They knew what they wanted to do. They had it out there, but it was taking that good idea and how do we make it sustainable through daily operations. Another thing I think is important is a lot of small businesses are family run. So instead of having like a formal structure in place, they want to use the mom and dad, the husband wife, thing in business, and that's not a good model to have. Whether it's family, friends, whatever, you need to make sure that you treat everybody like an employee. You follow the policies. I think this protects the business. It helps make things more stable. And I think when I looked at it, more businesses are actually starting to adopt, human resources into their business, which is why the success rate has increased a little bit and gone down from 90 to 65% failure rate.
Okay, could you elaborate on why a family-run business has a greater failure rate? As in, if they learn how to keep the professional and personal life separate, wouldn't that be a big advantage having your family run the business together?
You would think so, but anybody knows when you're dealing with family, they tell you in business never do business with family and never borrow money from family.
Yeah.
They always seem to be that silent partner who's not so silent. And don't get me wrong, I mean I've seen it on both sides. There's some families that get along really well, but the ones that do, they have very clearly defined roles. One will be the leader, one will be the manager. Each one will take a business function and they'll break it up. That's great. Um, However, I've seen some too where they're just like, oh, well, your family, I'm just going to give you a job, come work here. Some people want to be in that business, some don't. I've seen some where the owner wants to pass it down to their children, and the children are part of the business, and the children honestly don't want the business. They may want to start their own, they may want to do something else. So when I say this, if the employee is not engaged in it, it doesn't matter if it's family, it doesn't matter if it's a third party individual. They're not going to work as hard for you as it is. And in a small business, you need everybody to pull together and want to be on the same page and want to be there. Just because you're family doesn't mean like, you have to be in that business. Also, too, when you start looking at it, husband and wives are great. However, if you look at the divorce rate, it's higher than it ever has been in the history of time. So that being said, if it's a husband and wife company and they get a divorce, not only is that affecting personal, it's affecting business, which can also cause failure rates. So sometimes it's better to, in a way, do business with strangers that complement your differences. So you balance it out, then always just to say, well, we're family, let's start a business. Again, if it works, it makes sense. But if you have like two brothers and they don't get along, it would not make sense for them to be business partners and to start the business.
Right, got it. Now let's talk about the pandemic. Could you discuss the pandemic's impact on small business and how they've adapted to survive and thrive?
Yeah, everybody lived through COVID, so it was a rough 2 years economically. Things completely changed. So, in the business world, that's called a disruptive technology.
Yeah.
Education in particular went through this, where they pushed everything from being in person to having to do everything electronic. So there was a really quick experience curve. Some did it well, some didn't. For small businesses, I think the same kind of goes. Some embraced it, some didn't. You will notice during that 2 year period, a lot of large corporations ended up going under because they weren't sustainable. However, small businesses were able to actually increase it. I think the reason being for that is with the leveling of the playing field and everybody having access to technology and these resources being out there, it made it more possible for small businesses to compete. They were able to get out there more. Also, too, when you have the pandemic, people were less likely to travel far or to do business with, say, like, overseas or different states due to all the restrictions. So
Right.
so then basically what that forced them to do? Look locally. So I think
Yeah.
that the pandemic actually, while it hurt large businesses for that reason, actually supported small businesses because they were close by, they were relevant, and they probably got awareness that they never had before. So in a way, I think small businesses might be hoping for another pandemic to help, but it's not good for big business, but it was great for small business.
Right. What do the stats look like? Have they increased? The small business success rates have increased post-pandemic. Do you think so?
I think it depends on the type of the business. So a lot of small businesses, there's two types they can do. They can do products or services. The ones that I've seen do products um, have kind of decreased. Services went up by a lot. Um, the only exception to that are restaurants because those are both goods and service based. So they've had to address different ways in that pandemic to make those changes. And what I've seen with the successful ones, it's a good leadership and management structure. They're able to take a look at that, do some planning, and figure out how to incorporate both models into their business plan, so that way they could operate either in person or remotely.
Okay. All right. Now, I would love to ask you regarding funding and capital and how access to capital can make or break the factor of a small business, right? So, have you seen any changes in financing options or approaches available to small business owners in recent years compared to the past?
Yeah, so in one of my earlier jobs I had, I was working as a manager at a bank. And one of my main jobs was people would come in, they'd want to start up their own business, and they'd want to get a loan. And I can tell you 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, I would have to reject them. The first question I would ask, where's your business plan? And if they didn't have it, the conversation was done. Those that did have a business plan, we went through it, and I would ask them, where's your projections? Where did you get your numbers from? We'd have to go through the process to see if it looks solid. If they passed that step, then it was, well, let's look at your personal history. We had to go through your credit checks, credit reports, see what your debt to equity ratio was. And if it was too high, then it wasn't good. So I think now there's more options. I think with a lot of businesses going out, and I think with the economy going up and down, banks are more willing to have to spread their investments around instead of just to large companies. So they're taking more chances on small businesses, and like anything else, the more established a small business gets, the more history it has behind it, the more stable it becomes. Since they've been around longer now than I was say 10, 15 years ago, banks are seeing that they're not as risky as they were. So I think you're seeing more opportunities there for loans and lines of credit and things like that. Also with technology, you're getting, Venmo, all these other different ways of Square app too, of taking payments. I know me personally, when I'm out, and I'm doing events or anything that I'm doing for my businesses, that's a great tool to have. Back then you didn't. So your ability to get funds was limited to either, say cash or check. Checks are iffy. Nobody wants to take them, and cash hardly anybody has. So I think those technologies have helped small businesses as well. Also with, e-commerce being out there, the conversion rates between, different countries are also there. So yeah, I think technology financing, there's been a whole lot more options. You can get away from, doing home equity lines of credit to support your businesses and losing your personal assets.
Right.
Also, the ability to open up, personal LLCs and kind of separate your business income from your personal income, I think has made it very positive for small business owners to want to get more into that and have more, flexibility and finance in their business.
What about funds from non-banking institutions as in investments, angel
So
investment?
yeah, like angel investors, yeah, I think they're still out there. Some are looking to make a quick buck, and that's great if you can find them. But again, there's so many that are out there. I know if you join like the Small Business Association, you can get loans at a lower rate, things like that. So I think those are good. But I mean, don't forget too, there's also very large numbers out there, and you're also competing for things. It's like a student that's applying for college trying to get a scholarship. There's all this paperwork, all this time that has to go into it. It can have a great payoff, but if you're going to do that, I mean, you have to make a really solid case.
Right.
And the example that I like to give is, when you watch Shark Tank, you got a great idea, but when you're pitching it to the panel, it's more than just that idea. You've got to have a plan in place, and no one's going to give you money unless they think they're going to get an investment back. So it has to be a very solid plan for, when you're at that stage to convince someone to just give you money.
Right. Got it. So, you would suggest what would be a good time for a company to take up a funding? Would it be from the start or after building a good base?
So a lot of people, my answer is going to be both. A lot of people think that once their company is going, that's the time to go get the financing. It's actually the opposite. You want to try to secure that funding in an ideal world ahead of time. The reason being, especially if you are a goods-based industry, you're going to go through that supply curve. And that's going to go, up and down through introduction, growth, maturity, decline. You want to make sure you have your funding there so that way you can already have something launching and you have enough capital left over so that way you can continue to grow and be sustainable. If you're a one-shot pony where you have that great product that starts to go down, by the time that you're going to the investors, you've already hit your peak. They're not going to invest at that point when it starts to decline. You want to get them on the way up. So I would say earlier on is good. Now, if you are expanding your business and you've got a good solid line, then it's good to say, okay, here's my financials, here's what I've done, here's a different direction that I'm thinking about going. I'd like some investment to help grow this. But there's always that question, it goes back to the phrase with them, what's in it for me? So when
Right.
you're going to that other business, you're going for that loan or you're trying to get that funding, you want to be able to show them how that's going to help them as well. And like I said, when the economy is bad, it can go either way. It's a risk. So who you choose, the reputation of the company is going to play a huge part in making that deal and getting that funding.
Okay. Got it. Thank you for sharing the valuable input. Now, let's talk about sustainability and social responsibility. They've gained a good prominence in business practices. So how can small businesses as well incorporate these values into their management and leadership strategies?
So the small business people are going to kill me for saying this, but this is one thing they don't want to do. It's not because they don't support the economy or social responsibility. What it is, it becomes very costly. So when you talk about carbon credits and you talk about supporting the local communities, going green in these features for small businesses, a lot of these require new equipment, new resources, new plans, new business policies and procedures. For large corporations, they have more money to throw at this, so that way they can make it happen. Small businesses can be a huge impact. So I think it's a very good thing to do, and I think a lot of small business owners support it. Financially, it comes as a shock, and especially when you're starting up, it's not something that you're thinking about having to do. I think over the course of time, as they get more established, it's something they can incorporate more into their policies. But what you see a lot of them do is, instead of focusing largely in global areas, they will focus again on their communities. They'll hire people individually. They'll make sure that they help clean up the resources. They'll do foundations or donations and things like that, so that way they become a staple of the community where people want to support.
So they need to have a focus on this part from the start.
I think so, and I think this is one of those areas that's very overlooked, because when you're starting a business, your goal is to just get up, get going, you're focused on the product. So,
Right.
like I said, unless you've had a lot of business classes or a lot of experience and read the books, and they talk about here's the different areas you have to do, and then oh by the way, there's also responsibility you have to do for social awareness. That may be something they overlook. I know when I worked for the state and the counties, we had what were called SWAM vendors, which were small women and minority-owned businesses. We never knew when we did things that a certain percentage of our sales had to go to them that was dictated by the government. Well, when you
Right.
looked at the prices, they cost between 30 to 60% more than if you like Amazon, Walmart, things like that. We were forced to use those vendors, and not that it's a bad thing. They were trying to help grow those types of small business owners for the community that was there, but it's more costly. So I think that's something that as a small business, when you're doing this, you need to think about and be aware that that's there,
Okay.
so that way you can help kind of plan and budget. And that's also a great thing when you're going to get a business plan and looking for a loan to say, look, here's my goal. I also want to help these businesses. So that way you're showing a value chain instead of just, just for yourself.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Now, could you share a success story or an example of a small business that faced adversity but thrived due to effective management and leadership?
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorite restaurants that I go to. I love Peruvian chicken, and if you've never had it, you need to. During COVID, a lot of restaurants ended up struggling, big time. They had to lay off all their, hostesses, waiters, waitresses, things like that.
Right.
The money just wasn't there. What they started going to was, Grubhub and these delivery services, or just, carry out only. It was a mess. This guy was unique. He was actually a family friend of mine, so we kind of worked on a plan together. But he was unique because he never struggled between in business operations or running the delivery service part. He took his restaurant, which was small, and he divided it up, and he basically had two sets of workers. So that way, if you wanted to take out, you could do that. If you wanted in person, you could do that. And he basically kept the same structure for how the food was delivered to both. So that way it was secure, met all the COVID regulations. Nobody was late. Every order got there on time. Now I bring this up because when I went to, like everybody else, you couldn't get food. So I try to, go to different places and get food. And you struggle. It was either you waited 30 minutes in the restaurant, for someone to finally come to you because they were running, to go orders, or, when you were getting your to go orders, the orders was wrong. They were overwhelmed. The system wasn't there in place. So a lot of them struggle, and a lot of them to this day have not recovered because the business just wasn't there. They haven't been able to get waiters or waitresses back, so the restaurants remain half empty. They're losing money on their rent. He was able to, when he thought about this from the beginning, he put that plan in place. He never deviated for that entire 2 years. So he kind of, in a very unstable world, he was kind of able to unfreeze his business. He went through, came up with a new process, and then he refroze what he did. So he has been very successful. He's actually opened up, I think, one or two more restaurants in the area based on that. So I would think that's a
Mhm.
pretty good success story. Yeah.
Right. So what would you say was the key to his success?
It's
The
it's the
one.
planning and management. A lot what I saw a lot of other people do is, you're putting out fires. Hey, COVID happened, the pandemic happened. We don't want to lose customers, so we're just gonna offer these services. I think a lot of them saw the technology and they put it in there, which would work, but nobody took the time or had the time to really plan it out. He, like I said, and again, I knew them, so I kind of helped out with that. So I don't want to pick on anybody else that might not have had that experience. But he was able to kind of have a plan in place before he did it. He shut down for a couple extra days, thought about what he wanted to do, but then when he opened up, he had his plan in place. He followed it down to the letter. He had his leadership, he had his management team. He gave everybody in that small business a job to do and also saying what they thought. He would have customers come in and he would say, how was your service? What would you like us to do? He would bring everybody involved so that way the process ran smooth and he can make minor adjustments instead of let's try this, this failed, let's start over from scratch over and over and over again.
Okay. Got it. Now, my final question would be that as a teacher and youth minister, how do you see your role in mentoring the next generation of business leaders and entrepreneurs? And what is the advice that you would like to offer to aspiring small business owners?
So I see this at George Mason. I see it in high school. Typically business was the world of, of men. Now, when you look at the statistics, women are the majority owners of small businesses. So you see that more in the classrooms.
Right.
So I joke with the guys all the time, if you're used to being the breadwinner, if that's your mentality, you better change. Be nice to the females in the class because you're going to end up working for them.
Yeah.
But I think it's great. I mean, women are great multitaskers. They're able to handle multiple things. So when you take their skills like that and you apply it to a small business, it's pretty much what it lines up, identical to what they're more capable of doing than most men. So I think that's great. The advice that I would give is, for small businesses, sometimes you hear the phrase, it's not personal, it's business. Do not have that attitude. People are going to come to your small business for the opposite. It is personal. It is you. So you are your business. You have, like, even behind you now, you got Vibrant Publishers, your logo. When you go out, people recognize that you are speaking on that behalf. So everywhere that you're at, you need to be your business.
Right.
Don't be ashamed of that. You worked hard for it. Let it represent you. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into that, and that's important. That's going to be your legacy. So for small business owners coming up, it's yes, learn the basics. If you can go to school, that's great. If not, there's books out there. You don't have to have 100 degrees to go out there and try this. You got to have the will and the drive to want to do it. I've seen some high school students before they graduate. I actually helped one last year. He started his own business as soon as he graduated. He's doing great. So it's not an age thing. It's a how much work and effort do you want to put into it? It is possible. You can't be afraid to take risks, but you also have to know when to throw in the towel in one direction, maybe try something else, and not be afraid of that change.
All right. Thank you for your valuable inputs on this topic. And Jamie, we appreciate your presence here today and for sharing your insights.
Yeah, I
And
really appreciate you guys having me.
to our audience, we are grateful for your participation and we trust that you found the podcast enjoyable and thought provoking. We'll be putting Dr. Jamie's social media handles and details in the description. And once again, Dr. Jamie, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.